Thank you very much to Terry. If you'd like to just come and sit over here. We're now going to move into a panel discussion about how the City of London is changing to maintain its global competitiveness. And as part of that, I'm going to welcome three very prominent figures who are involved in the development of London transport infrastructure. First of all, Mr. Stephen Norris, many who need no introduction to many of you. He was a Member of Parliament for over 14 years. Best known in the UK as being the Minister of Transport in London from 1992 to 96, Vice Chairman of the Conservative Party and twice their candidate for Mayor of London. Also joining Stephen, I'd like to welcome Cornelius Medvai, who is the London Managing Partner of Eversheds, a large law firm focusing on the very substantial transport client sector base of Eversheds. And finally, on the far end, Ian Macbeth, who is the Business Engagement and Programme Manager for Transport for London. So please, can you give a warm welcome to Stephen, Cornelius and Ian.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you for mentioning my appalling record against Ken Livingstone. Very good. Very kind of you. About as good as Steve McLaren's record at Nottingham Forest, but we'll gloss over that. Can I just say that from my point of view, just to introduce this session, it's a real privilege to be with two of the people who've certainly shaped my thinking, having been involved in transport policy specifically for the last 20 years. They are, of course, Terry Farrell and Philip Ross, because they address the huge issues that if you're looking at Europe's largest city by far, and you take account of some of the statistics that Philip mentioned, you simply have to attach huge importance to. I mean, Philip was talking, for example, about the 63.5% of us who still commute. He showed the picture of the pattern of congestion, the peaks, both morning and evening, peaks, which are a feature not just, of course, of London, but of most urban cities. And that's set against the background, which I know Norman Baker will have talked about in his session, because Norman, I'm delighted to say, really gets this aspect of transport, which is that ever since the Romans pushed a cart up Watling Street, there's been a kind of umbilical link between economic growth and traffic growth. All the time, over the centuries, as economies have grown, so demand to travel has grown, both leisure travel, but more specifically, travel related to the growth of an economy. And we're now getting to the stage where, in London, the way in which we've traditionally done that is beginning to break down. London is remarkable in that the composition, the demographic composition of bus use in London is radically different from anywhere else in the country. It's an AB1 mode of travel as much as it's a CD mode of travel. Why? Well, of course, we might say it's because Londoners are so much more conscious of their social responsibility and make moral judgments every day to get on the Northern Line. I have personally set that proposition aside. We all know the reason. And the reason is because car travel into central London is a nightmare. And it's not only a nightmare logistically, it's also necessarily extremely expensive because you're trying to take advantage of a very scarce commodity. The public transport systems, which are the natural, if you like, shift from car travel, are, however, also coming under enormous pressure. And those peaks that we saw, the peaks of congestion, actually demonstrate that. What we now have to be thinking of, therefore, are two developments of technology, one of which is to look at the ways in which technology can help us get a lot more out of our transport system than we currently do, our public transport system, and the other is how technology is simply changing the face of work in exactly the way that Philip and his colleague were suggesting. On the former, we now have, and I imagine a huge number of people in this audience have, an Oyster card in our pocket. Contactless travel, the ability to deduct quite specific amounts from that stored value is now commonplace. But equally commonplace would be the proposition that we would vary fares during the day. 1.3% of people actually want to work from home. we're quite clear that home working is the equivalent of house arrest. You know, that there's a Dutch study that shows that actually people who work from home make more trips than commuters, because basically they're bored to death, and it's what stops them murdering their children. You know, if we go down the conventional route, which says, oh, well, that's all right, then technology solved the problem, we'll all do home working, and we'll all do hot desking, which incidentally is equally loathed by many who have to endure it, because actually they want a space where they can store the things that are of value to them. They want to be surrounded by things that they feel familiar with. There's something incredibly unpleasant about the idea of not having any space that you can call your own. It's a bit like the paperless office, the third great canard of technology development. I've never seen so much paper since somebody kept adding, please don't print this to the bottom of their emails. Generally adds an extra page. So what do we do? Well, what we have to do is to think about ways in which you're a little bit more in tune with what people actually want to do, how their lives can be lived, so that they feel that they are getting more out of the world of work than they're perhaps getting at the moment. It rather addresses the question of our colleague from Cisco asking about the change in the shape of the built landscape. Because here in London, we have 27 town centres. Those town centres are largely deserted during the day. The borough in London that has the lowest average wage per worker, in the borough that is Bromley. Bromley is probably one of the richest boroughs in London in terms of the income of its residents, but nobody actually who lives there works there. They immediately exit on crowded public transport systems into the honeypots in the centre of town. And so from our point of view, the dual benefit of first of all being able to give people the option of taking lower fares to travel off-peak, doing their emails at home, doing their emails on the pause before they then go into the centre of town to meet. And I was interested in Philip's observation that, you know, there's this strong link between the idea of people congregating and developing the new ideas where innovation comes from. Nobody's suggesting that we're not going to want to meet, but we're going to want to meet much more in the sort of rubber bank atmosphere, perhaps, the airline lounge atmosphere almost, than in the conventional workplace that we see so much of. And this is something I'm going to ask Cornelis about, because Cornelis Medve from Eversheds has led on exactly this kind of flexible working. And we're also seeing, as a consequence of that, the prospect of the development of much of our 60s and 70s non-air-conditioned office stock, quite in the centre, being converted firstly into residential, because, you know, the idea of the city now becomes a place in which people actually live and enjoy the congregation, enjoy the facilities, the artistic and leisure facilities that can be built around a concentration of people. And maybe even a new type of semi-residential work area, not the classic live-work unit, which tends to be sort of a part-converted industrial estate, but actually now a new live-work unit which really is about where you can live and where you can work, but in the context of being able to escape from your own sort of cell, the own area that you feel that you own. In Transport for London, we have acknowledged that this works. In my view, we don't attach yet sufficient importance to it. Most transport authorities in the UK see their job as to facilitate travel. And that, after all, is perfectly admirable, and it's what we want them to do. But increasingly, all of them, and in Transport for London, which Ian will say a word about, we're having to think beyond just predict and provide. You know, the old notion that you predict how the economy is going to grow and then just lay down the concrete to facilitate people moving. There isn't enough space and there isn't enough enthusiasm to do it. So that's the background to what we're doing in London, how we're trying to approach the issues of 1.2 million people being added to the population of this city by 2030, because that's the current estimate. We used to say the last figure we had was something like 720,000, and Ken Livingstone described that, I think, very vividly as a city the size of Leeds coming to London. 1.2 million, I'm told, is the population of North Yorkshire, which, you know, is an even less attractive proposition, but there you are. Well, you know, as they say, you can always tell a Yorkshireman, but you can't tell him much. But despite that, I come from the other side of the Pennines. But despite that, I mean, the real issue is that, you know, when you look at East London, this is something that Terry, of course, has talked about and has written about. There is an urgent necessity for us to look at not just spatial planning and where, in the sense of where people will live, but also how that develops into these new patterns of commuting. That's the background, as I say, but Cornelius, you've been involved, I know, in really putting some of this idea into practice, into Eversheds. It's a traditional, in the best sense of the word, London professional services practice, currently centred in Wood Street, very much in the heart of the City of London. How's the experience been for you?
Well, I think we have
a
number of different pressures. We talked just now about the pressures of transport and property costs and the opportunities technology offers us. But for professional service firms, and particularly for law firms, there's increasingly a pressure on us from our clients to focus on the outputs and forget about the inputs. Traditionally, lawyers have always charged their time. They've calculated the value of their work to their clients by analysing the number of hours they've spent doing it. In the 19th century, it was even easier. We just calculated the number of words in the document and charged a penny a word or whatever it was. Now clients are saying that's really not good enough. We don't really care how long it takes you. We don't actually care where you do it. We want you to do it effectively, efficiently, and we want you to give us the outcome, and we'll pay you the price that you tell us you're going to charge at the beginning of the process. So suddenly, a lot of the suppositions that underlay our philosophy of all coming together in one office and all sitting at our desks and working away endlessly is coming under threat from that angle as well. What we wanted to do in Eversheds was, and we've been doing this, it's a raggedy progression, I would say. It's an evolution. But what we've been doing is to encourage people to work. Everybody works certainly in open plan, which is actually still a bit revolutionary in the legal world. And if it's revolutionary in the UK, it would be completely revolutionary in the US and quite a lot of other jurisdictions. We want them to work, and we created, when we designed our offices in London, lots of third spaces to get them used to the idea that they weren't actually going to always work around their desk, but they might come together in different spaces. They might escape from their desk to go and work and think. And we've also encouraged, we're in the third iteration of our flexible working approach. We encourage people to work flexibly, both in terms of if they want to have a sort of a formal arrangement, but also if they simply want to have an informal arrangement, they can work with their line manager's approval, which is meant to be easily given and generally is, how and when they want to. So I think all these things are coming together to change the way we work. We did, when we actually moved into our building, try to, if not banish paper, remove paper. I have to say that's been, it was wonderful when we moved in. There was hardly any paper visible, but hardly any has been thrown away since, and that was 3.5 years ago, so it's actually quite difficult to see the daylight.
Just out of interest, Connie, a lot of businesses that I talk to are increasingly buying professional services from respected names, but through their offices in Leeds and Manchester and elsewhere in the provinces. And they're doing it for a very straightforward reason, which is the quality is there, but the cost is not. And that's, of course, because, you know, the whole business of housing those people, perhaps even remunerating them, is different in the provinces. So taking what you're saying, first of all, is that a valid proposition? And if it is the future that we're going to see less city centre, London city centre, professional services, and more of this, frankly, being exported? Same people, same quality, but less expensive for the consumer.
Absolutely, and we've been doing this for a long time, and we treat all our teams as we form the teams and we manage the teams without regard to geography. We very rarely have a team working on a significant activity which is purely based in the City of London. One of our major clients is TfL, and 80% of the work we do for them is done outside London. We have 47 offices around the world, and increasingly we're looking at ways in which we can pool resources, expertise, skills, again, without regard for geography. So geography is becoming, fixed geography is less and less significant, both on the micro level in the terms of where you sit in your office, and in the larger level of where your office is, if indeed you have one. A lot of people work in 2 or 3 offices during the course of the week, and of course they spend quite a lot of time with their clients. And the best place you can spend your time actually is with your clients. That's just a general good principle.
Absolutely. What sort of saving did you make? Do you ever do any assessment when you did provision your new office? What sort of notional saving, at least, did you feel that you were making over, if you like, what we'll call the conventional model? Because I'm conscious of the fact is, I think we all are, that London space, particularly sort of city space, is anything from sort of 50 to £100 a square foot. Any kind of ability to shrink is clearly massively valuable, isn't it? The sort of figures that Philip was talking about, 6-8 million. These are very large amounts of money.
We did look at the various options for fitting out the space between cellular and an open plan, and we went for a style of open plan which we felt that the city lawyers were capable of accepting. Lawyers are quite traditional and hard to persuade, and the cost of that actually was the capital cost of that was no less than it would have been if we'd been on a cellular model. The real saving comes in the flexibility, the ability to put teams together quickly in spaces and break them up again. The fact you don't have to move partitions, you don't have to move furniture, everything you can go and sit at anybody's desk and access your telephone and your and we still have landline telephones, but not for much longer, I suspect, and your desktop. So all of those things, it's the much lower maintenance costs and facilities costs going forward.
Yeah. Ian Macbeth, whose title is Business Engagement Programme Manager at TfL, and I first met in the 90s when I was a Transport Minister, and we were developing the early sort of travel to work planning, green business planning that operations like Boots in Nottingham, who Ian was working with at the time, were doing massively to the benefit of the workforce, but also, of course, to the benefit of the bottom line. It was a real win-win, and it's something that's still very much a practice, and I'm sure everybody in this room is aware. Ian, what's your sense of how this is, if you like, being translated in an organisation like TfL? I mean, you and I both know it very well. I've described it as, if you like, rather traditional, doing the job of carrying people, and no doubt that's exactly what it should have in its mind. But do you sense that there is now a move toward engaging more in these perhaps more lateral thinking modes?
Absolutely. For those of you not aware, TfL's probably been embracing flexible working for probably 6-7 years now. More recently, we're actually sort of having an office relocation strategy. Again, that's cost focused, so it's reducing the cost to everybody in this room. We've got to look at our efficiencies. And we're moving out of central London locations. The property portfolio is being consolidated and changed. And as part of that, we have flexible working ourselves. So we have teleconferencing, video conferencing. And we've supported and tried to sort of engage with the business community and sort of give our experiences and help people along the way. And around about 5 years ago, we worked with the CBI and the TUC and published a guide on flexible working. And I was quite glad the Minister name-checked us this morning, because we've reissued our Smarter Working Guide this morning, updated with the latest legislation. And really in there, there are examples of how we've worked with businesses, and there's cross-fertilisation of ideas. We've brought ideas back from them, and some of the sort of behaviour change issues that sort of perhaps make life more challenging, shall we say. Technology we don't find as an issue. It's actually sort of behavioural change issues and psychology that really does need addressing.
And what do you think the biggest of those is, Ian? I mean, when you talk about behavioural change, and I think I understand that. So I say I think these ideas like home working and paperless office, somewhat of a breakdown when you get down to the human level. What do you think the big drivers actually are?
I think it's often process inbuilt, and one of the ladies in the audience earlier on mentioned about whether or not large businesses were flexible and agile enough to adopt that. I think it very much depends. You do need some, a sponsor really at a very senior level to drive these things through. One of the other sides of things, though, is we do find that the small businesses in particular are very agile. You know, they can adopt things that help them, and it's nearly always down to the bottom line. So we do find that the sort of smaller businesses are very agile and able to do that, but it doesn't mean to say that when a big business decides to do it properly, they can really do things. I remember very well working with Nationwide. They put in a complete new desk system. There was no phones, no fixed infrastructure. It was all Wi-Fi based. And they felt, as a bank with security issues, if they could do it, anybody could.
Yeah, absolutely. Do we ban social network access in TfL?
I'm afraid we do.
Well, we shouldn't. We shouldn't. I mean, it's very interesting because there was a BT study years ago now. I mean, Philip will correct me. So 4 or 5 years ago, that they said that the key to, you know, anchoring people at home, because they, of course, do work on the basis of having a lot of home working, kind of virtual call centre model, was precisely to not just say, yes, you can, but actually encourage people to develop personal relationships and conversations outside work, you know. And I must say, I think it is probably more about some IT security man getting too worried rather than, because they're going to do it anyway, for God's sake, to recognise reality.
Well, people do it anyway. Virtually everybody's got a smartphone and they're all on there every day. I think the other interesting thing is for the younger generation, actually, they do like coming into the office. It's where quite a lot of their social activities take place. And let's face it, an awful lot of people meet their partners at work.
Yeah. Well, there you go. There's a new item on the TfL agenda. I can promise you for next week. Thank you, Ian. Can I just, Terry, while we've got you, and as I say, if I may say, the third person doesn't need it from me, but I share Bill Bryson's admiration for the work that Terry's done over years, over the last 20 years, certainly, that I had the privilege of knowing him. But you made a very interesting observation about the Thames Estuary there, Terry, which certainly slightly surprised me, because I, like you, have worried about this idea of the airport flipping over. I always thought the idea of the Estuary Airport was a bit of a cop-out, because it was suitable for people who wanted to say, I don't want a third runway at Heathrow because, you know, we built the city too near to the airport, but because I know lots of businesses want more travel opportunity, why don't we build it on the other side of the city? It was, as I say, I don't think it was ever terribly well thought through. But we have to have a new Thames barrier, don't we? Otherwise, you know, the latest figures I've seen is that the current barrier, incidentally, is clearly just not up to the task. It should have been useful for the next 20, I think it's 27, 30 years. But actually, you know, with rising tides, it's actually being used far more now than it ever should have been for the next 10. We're going to have to provide a new barrier. And at the moment, failure to do it means taking 120,000 potential homes out of use because they now are in what would be the new floodplain. So if we say barrier yes, the logic then would say barrier plus some sort of energy production proposition, your idea of sort of underwater turbine, tidal capture, that sort of thing. If we're going to do that, then the idea of saying, well, why don't we build on a deep sea port that can take Triple E vessels that can only go to Bremerhaven or Rotterdam at the moment, build them into the UK, then possibly, well, you know, why not the airport? And create a real sort of new hub for London to the east, which maybe is certainly where the next 1.2 million people are going to go. It's where all the Olympic investment has gone. It's about balancing the city between west and east. What's your sort of thought on that? Is there any logic in that, or do you think the flipping argument is still the overwhelming one?
I think there are several questions there. One is flood control. They prefer it to call, and I quite agree with this. They prefer to call it flood management, because there are a lot of different techniques. A barrier just pushes the rising water somewhere else. You may save the Thames Estuary, but you kind of sink Essex and Suffolk and Kent in the process.
Yeah. Well, there's no loss there. So,
it's to do with the shape of the North Sea and the surges, and how you manage them has to entail sacrifice of land. And my view is that that goes well with habitat. It doesn't necessarily go well with vast new infrastructure and investment in a new city. And building an airport there would actually bring with it a new city. There's no doubt about it. And if you look at the pattern of development of Britain, it's gradually moving more and more to a land spine. And high-speed rail up the centre would consolidate that. We're looking at the middle of England and all the way up to Scotland being a spine of growth, including the southeast. The places that are not growing, including in the southeast, are the poor areas of Kent out there, the poor areas of Essex out there, and all those cities up on isolated from the spine, Hull, Middlesbrough, and including large areas of Yorkshire and so on. They're off centre, and the centre is not full. And I keep showing all these post-industrial areas in London that have got great amounts of accommodation potential. London is half the density of Paris. If you actually were to raise the density of the core, you would actually not only accommodate 1.2 million, you'd actually accommodate another 3 million. And when you come to density, the densest boroughs in the United Kingdom, in fact in Europe, if not the world, are Westminster and Kensington, Chelsea. And often it's the poor boroughs like Newham that are the lowest densities. So actually we're not full up. And when you look at what people want, they don't want to move out to the east. In fact, they want to be where Britain is. They want to be able to go up to Birmingham and Manchester or across to the centre to Wales on the other side or what have you. They're not, the limb doesn't work, and it's not the place to put the heart. I think it's a heart transplant. I think you've got actually to give some bypasses and pacemakers to the heart we've got and make it work.
Thank you very much, Terry. Yeah, I'd love to have carried this on, but we were sandwiched between our previous speaker, wonder who that was, and lunch. And that's far more important.
Absolutely.
So,
I can hear the sound of rumbling stomachs getting closer, like tribal drums. So we should move on. But can I just once again thank very much our panel for coming in to talk to us today. That's Sir Terry Farrell, Stephen Norris, Cornelius Medvai, and Ian. Sorry, Ian. Ian. You were so quiet there. Ian Macbeth on the end. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so before we break for lunch, did you agree with the panel or disagree? If so, put your views out on Twitter, the hashtag WORKTECH. Are home workers under house arrest, like Stephen said? Or do you just admire Sir Terry's red socks? Those are both subjects of discussion that are currently being discussed in the Twitter sphere at this moment. Lunch is going to be served now in the meeting rooms 2 and 4, so please do help yourselves and make your way also to the exhibition rooms to see some of our exhibitors. Also, 50 of you, that's the first 50 people who booked, will have received a free copy of a new book called Future Work by Alison Maitland and Peter Thompson. It's a fantastic book. I've got it in my bag. I've been reading it for the last week or so. And if you'd like to have your free copy signed by the authors, there will be a signing during lunch in the foyer. And for those of you who'd like to buy a copy of Future Work, Palgrave Macmillan, the publishers, are in Zone 1, and they're doing a half-price deal today. You can buy it for £9 instead of the RRP, $18.99. So that's it. We're going to break for lunch, and we're going to come back here at 1:45 p.m. So thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you back here after lunch.